Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are going to talk political national news. And before we get into the first topic, I want to correct something I said last week. I got three people correcting me. Dianne Feinstein is not up for re-election this time around. She's up for re-election in 2024. And in fact, there's a lot of talk about pressuring her to resign before then. And a lot of people who are looking to get into into that action. But I wanted to start with the top story of McCarthy, the probably going to be the Speaker of the House if the Republicans retake it in November. He was caught. Apparently, he'd made some phone calls to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney had claimed that he basically said that he would, after January 6th, believe that the conversation was around January 10th, that he was going to that he was going to demand that Trump step down immediately before even the transition, and some other things. And he denied saying them, and then but it turns out he was taped, and there was tapes played on the Rachel Maddow show on, I believe it was Friday evening, and so he's caught in a lie. And of course, a lot of his defenders are saying, well, they all lie. It's it's not it's not such a big deal. Trump, of course, is happy with the fact that what it does is it shows his power, that he was able to basically bring McCarthy to his knees and get him to not do what he said he was going to do. And but there's a big deal. But also, apparently, it's come out that he's had some things to say about other politicians, some of the other right-wingers who were involved in January 6th, including Matt Gaetz. And real quickly, I will just quote. I can't get the actual quote up, but but he basically said that that Matt Gaetz and Scalise, who is another person involved in the phone call, were sniveling to Liz Cheney, and that they are weak men, and apparently they're, at least one of them, I believe Scalise, is trying to work things out with Matt Gaetz, having met him privately. Anyway, a lot going on here. Probably will not hurt McCarthy's ability to become Speaker of the House or remain minority leader should they not take the House. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one because there's a couple elements here. One is that, like you said, that new book that's coming out called This Will Not Pass, Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future by Alexander Burns and Jonathan Martin. When they were working on that book, there was a person who had tape recorded that January 10th conversation. And so that's like the meat and potatoes of what's been getting a lot of press this week because it's McCarthy, in his own words, being very critical of the more extreme calls, not necessarily for violence, but the perception of the risk that several of his Republican House member colleagues on that things that they said could be construed that the crowds would be whipped up into violence. So he was acting as like the top leader in the House, like he's the minority leader there. And so what I thought was interesting was that there's on tape, right? There's an audio recording of the things that he said, but then I could talk to you, we'll go through some of those quotes here. But the big takeaway is that it's probably not going to have much of an impact on his ability, like you said, to be Speaker if and when the Republicans get the majority in November. So there's a very small fallout surrounding what was said, but this is a short-term kind of DC insider critique of what happened because of, I guess, the fact that enough time has passed now that not a lot of people are as fearful of that degree of violence escalating as just like how they were 4 days out. January 10th versus January 6th, they were only 4 days away and they didn't have the perspective. But I'll let you kind of respond beyond
Well,
that.
and I want to get into that because I think that the problem really isn't so much that McCarthy, they're shameless though. If they're not going to let something like this get in the way of their plans and and all of their power arrangements, but it does foster that division within the Republican Party. There are bad feelings, and you're dealing with people that aren't necessarily chronologically the most adult. I mean, for Matt Gaetz to say they are weak men, and refer to it as sniveling to Liz Cheney, that stuff that can really get in the way of the unity that they do need. I mean, it's very likely that the Republicans will retake the House, but it's not a guarantee. They've got to hold it together and be able to work together. And one of the biggest fears of the Republicans is the infighting between the Trumpers and never Trumpers within the party, or actually the never Trumpers have been kind of sidelined, but people who just want to get back to old fashioned conservative politics.
Yeah, so I'm with you that to a certain extent it's theirs to lose, and this is an internal conflict. We've talked before about how from at least from my perspective, the party leadership is very deferential to President Trump's supporters because they know that represents such an important percentage of their voters overall, which is why Liz Cheney is on the outside looking in, because she's a traditional conservative Republican, and she was a target at the time because she was standing up to President Trump and to the violence of January 6th, to the let's call it a riot or there's so many pejorative words for it. But here let's dive right into some of these quotes, because I think this is what the big brouhaha was all about. So for example, Congressman Brooks was there, Mo Brooks from Alabama, on January 6th outside at the Ellipse, saying everybody should fight like hell, and this is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking butt. But he didn't say but.
Right.
When that quote was brought to McCarthy's attention on the call, on the audio that you can listen to for yourself, the response was basically that he's putting people in jeopardy. I mean, he spoke similarly about Matt Gaetz, that they don't need to be doing this. And with Matt Gaetz, it was about his criticism of Liz Cheney, confronting her publicly, physically in space, in actual confrontation. And then basically McCarthy says, and this is a quote from the tape, he doesn't need to be doing this. We saw what people would do in the Capitol, and these people came prepared with rope with everything else. And so that's just a couple of the people. But they also talked about Steve Scalise, who potentially crossed a legal boundary. Scalise said that Gaetz potentially crossed a legal boundary.
Yeah.
Basically saying, also McCarthy said, this is kind of back and forth between the two of them, but McCarthy says, you think the president deserves to be impeached for his comments? That's almost something that goes further than what the president said. This stuff has got to stop. This country is too crazy. These are quotes. And finally, I do not want to look back and think we caused something or we missed something and someone got hurt. I don't want to play politics with any of that. So this was McCarthy trying to do damage control, knowing that there was about a half a dozen people. We just named a few, but there's others, that were saying some pretty awful things at the time, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Boebert, and others. And so they were trying to contain the damage control for future, so that they're not held culpable in the future.
Yeah, the other problem is apparently that's not all the tapes. So there's other conversations that are coming out. I don't know what Liz Cheney's game is, but she seems to want to basically undermine the Republican Party right now. So I almost kind of don't blame them for kind of turning on her a little bit, but I think she really sees it as a struggle for the soul of her party. I mean, she's not a liberal by any means. She's probably more conservative in many ways than some of those people, than Trump, certainly. Well, Trump isn't really anything, but he's whatever he needs to be for his power. But this is, this has got a problem that they're going to have. So I'll let you have the last word, Dave.
No, I'll say we'll have to pick this up as it goes on, just because. Final quote from Gates today, or in the last day or two, he says, "While I was protecting President Trump from impeachment, they were protecting Liz Cheney from criticism."
Yeah.
So they're still fighting internally more about it now, over the direction that the party will take going into the midterms.
Very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
I know this is not fun. I know this is not great. I know this is very tough, but what I want to do, especially through here, is I don't want to rush things. I want everybody to have all the information needed. I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it.
So a lot of news pertaining to Ukraine. Ukraine is getting a lot of weapons, bigger weapons now. It's a question as to whether or not they've received the airplanes that we talked about, but they're receiving artillery and anti-aircraft weaponry, and it's gone to a new phase. And we have a big international effort, having the leader of the UN going to talk to Putin, and it looks like a lot more pressure. Germany, because of their leadership being under so much scrutiny, is now a little bit more, the German government is a little bit more aggressive in this than it was, or at least less passive. And so a lot is going on. And among those things, we had Blinken and Austin from the cabinet actually visit Kiev on within the past few days, and of course, promised all kinds of weapons, but also as a show of I don't know if you want to call it solidarity or confidence in the Ukrainian military, they plan to reopen the embassy in Ukraine, and they intend to Brink has been nominated. She is currently the ambassador to Slovakia, and it's believed that she's going to make it through easily. And we'll see. But she is, for whatever her skills are, she is the chosen person. There was a little bit of friction with some Republicans, but I can't seem to find that as of tonight. So we'll have to table that discussion and see if it comes up in the confirmation hearings. But it does look like she is going to be the ambassador, and that she's going to be in Ukraine, in Kiev, hopefully not having a missile drop on her. Dave?
Yeah, interesting times. Over the weekend, I heard, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin do a press conference when they left the meeting with Zelensky in Kiev, and they had a 3-point plan, basically talking about stepping up support and opening up the embassy. Eventually, that was a phased opening up, it turns out. Right now, people are primarily working out of Poland, but then they come into Lviv temporarily, and then eventually they'll go further in towards the capital. So this is just a way of them saying this is a long, drawn out process, and we're going to persist. We're going to be here. But the third point, I think the thing that was most important, and I'm going to quote here from the New York Times. I don't want to get it wrong. Mr. Austin carefully orchestrated declaration that the United States wants Russia weakened to the point where it can't do things like invade Ukraine. Weakening them, this is not a quote, but weakening them would no longer have, so that they couldn't invade their neighbors. So that's the U.S. stated objective, which is very different than strictly providing defensive weapons to Ukraine. We could get more into that, but they did announce another wave of aid package, another $713 million. So these are near $1 billion chunks that are coming weekly to really ramp up the military support for both Ukraine and our NATO allies in the region. And finally, last thing, you introduced the ambassador, so I'll just say Ambassador Bridget Brink, appointed new ambassador to Ukraine. She passed unanimously. She's the current ambassador to Slovakia from the United States, where she was approved unanimously in the U.S. Senate. 25-year career diplomat, worked in Uzbekistan and Georgia, also in the State Department elsewhere, and also the White House National Security Council. So extremely experienced, bipartisan support. This seat, for folks that don't remember, this seat was vacant. The ambassador to Ukraine's been vacant since Trump withdrew Marie Yovanovitch back in 2019. So,
Right.
So this is a pretty major statement of an inflection point where we're transitioning now for a long haul.
We are, and as we mentioned, the aid is expanding. It doesn't appear that Russian troops are making a whole lot of progress. They take some towns, they lose some towns. There's some concern this morning being reported that maybe they have a chance of getting past Mykolaiv. I don't know if I'm saying it right. To be able to get around the river, to be able to get at Odessa from land, and that they've got planning a marine attack if that can happen. Missiles are still flying, but the Russians don't appear to even have Mariupol. They keep announcing that they've taken Mariupol, and then fighting erupts again. And so with this, though, it does seem like there is confidence that Ukraine it does not suffer a significant disadvantage, that they're going to be able to lose the country. So I definitely think that they're taking some chances by showing up to Kiev. As I predicted last week, I think actually Biden will make a surprise visit there at a certain point for all kinds of political reasons. And so, like I said, this will pass through probably pretty easy. Maybe the opposition was token just to oppose anything Biden's doing. I don't know. It's hard to know what's going on with the politics. It's clear that Russia is not winning the war on the ground. They're losing as many tanks as they were. This is definitely a good time to be if you're in arms manufacturing, unless, of course, you're a tank manufacturer. You might be a little bit worried. But other than that, I don't know. It's really strange politics, and it's hard for me to wrap my mind around what's happening politically around this.
It's we talk about, the whole three-dimensional chess thing going on. This is really as complicated as it gets because of the nature of the financial sanctions in the context of both an increasing interest rate environment and a massive commodities and inflationary environment. The United States is having a really difficult time balancing all of its interests and needs when it comes to the global economic order. At the same time that there's the strategic challenges of keeping NATO in alignment and recruitment of other allies, which is something I really wanted to mention, was that there was a conference over the weekend or within the last, it's all a blur right now, but in the last few days, there was a conference where not just NATO, but there were, I think, nearly 40 countries that attended and all made commitments for, military harmonization of support, of, a persistent support for Ukraine. And in response to that, Russia announced they're going to cut off the gas supply to Poland and Bulgaria. So then there's three-dimensional chess, not just the macro economy and not just strategic military, but also energy policy. So like you said, Germany is in this odd situation where they need to purchase oil and gas for the next year or so, but they're also transitioning and pivoting away from a post-World War II commitment to peace, and they are in fact committing heavy weaponry, and more importantly, giving credits for future production of weapons. So if any country has weapons, Germany will pay them to get them. This is not any, but within the alliance, countries that are committing heavy weaponry, Germany is willing to say, we'll give you the money so you can replace what you've got, just to get things in there quicker. Because basically, like we talked about last week, May 9th is the anniversary of the, I guess, Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in Russia, and that Putin people are widely anticipating he's going to want to make some declaration of success in Ukraine on this day, which gives him a very short window of time to actually come up with a narrative that seems optimistic or successful in what they've been able to accomplish so far. Whereas from everybody else's perspective, the West, it's looking like a stalemate at best, which is not a thing to boast about if you're Putin.
Well, that might explain the initiative to go after Odessa, because they can't get Kiev, and they don't seem to be making a whole lot of headway even in the Donbass region. They may even lose it, so it seems like this push towards Odessa might be kind of a desperate thing. Anyway, we'll be talking about that, and we need to move on to the next topic. Okay, this next section, DeSantis versus Disney. The culture war has gotten really bizarre of late in Florida. Of course, we know about the Don't Say Gay bill that DeSantis has signed, limits what can be discussed about LGBT and other sexuality issues in the schools at various ages. Very controversial for its being overbroad and vague, people not necessarily knowing where they are. And in fact, there's a group that's already sued based on it to say, okay, no Bible in there, because apparently there are portions of the Bible that violate these provisions. So it's going to be very interesting. But Disney took a stand. The Disney Corporation took a stand against this measure and against the culture war that the Republicans have whipped up. And apparently, the DeSantis and the Republicans seem to think that they can successfully attack Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck without worry of blowback. And so they removed the special tax status for Disney World. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I don't agree. I don't agree with the wording. I just don't think that they should get special taxes for those types of things. But that's a whole other story. But they insist that they've got that they can take on Walt Disney. The irony here is Walt Disney himself was kind of a reactionary. I mean, they had rules that men with long hair couldn't go into Disneyland, which led to a storming of Disneyland by anti-war protesters. He was not a liberal by any stretch of the imagination. So probably a lot of people are thinking, yeah, he's rolling in his grave because of the wokeness that Disney's adopted now. But it's just another one of those strange things. It reminds me a little bit of Murphy Brown versus the Dan Quayle. It's like, how do they keep getting into fights with fictional characters? Dave?
So there's several different ways to look at this. One is the pragmatic way to look at it and say, well, what benefit does DeSantis and his peer group get of Republican Party activist leadership? What do they get out of this other than grandstanding on culture issues? Because as we've talked about ad nauseum, the culture war is really a place where parties can, particularly in this case the Republican Party, they can drum up support, they could drum up the base, they could do team building, they can get fundraisers, they can get people to show up and turn out and vote on issues that are just polarizing and inflammatory. So the question is, is Florida really benefiting from this bill getting passed that supposedly empowers parents to have a little more control over the curriculum for young kids in schools? It just seems like a fight that nobody really is picking on pragmatic grounds. It's not, you're not advancing the health and well-being of children. It's more of a culture war. Sort of like propaganda, but it's That's my assessment of how it gets started. But then where does it end? And now we're talking about just actually, like you said, picking a fight with the Disney Corporation that is one of the biggest drivers of tourism in a Florida state that's majority economy tourism. Orlando, a city, Disney straddles 2 counties, and so there's this question of, well, if you're gonna step up and you sort of represent the prevailing social values of the country, or certainly of Central Florida, because let's be clear. Back in the 90s, only maybe 1 in 3 people supported same-sex marriages.
Right.
But now
is this a fight that
over
they want
70%?
To pick?
Excuse me?
Is this a fight that they want to pick against Disney? I mean, is Disney unpopular, or can they make Disney unpopular?
You would think they wouldn't want to pick it. That's what I'm saying. On a pragmatic grounds, it doesn't benefit the communities where they're going to take away the Disney's special privilege for their, basically it's like an self-administration unit for the benefit of roads and services, fire departments and sewage and water, etc. Disney pays $400 million a year for those services, and Disney pays a lot of taxes beyond that. But what benefit do these counties get? Well, they're going to get nearly $1 billion in debt. It's going to be really hard for these counties to absorb these responsibilities, all in the name of a culture war activism. So I would, honestly, I don't necessarily think that it's really a rational decision. If you looked at Paul Krugman, the New York Times, the article that he wrote recently about this, he's basically saying that, look, if people tell you where they're coming from, you should believe them. So like Florida's lieutenant governor went on Newsmax and said Disney is involved in indoctrinating children, sexualizing children. They have an agenda, declaring that there is a vast conspiracy of left-leaning people and liberals that Disney is a part of. And elsewhere, other people have reported that I hate to even say these things out loud because it's just so counterintuitive to even have this conversation. But people are saying, like, look, if you're not part of our culture war side, then you're against our culture war side. And so when Disney stands up and says, we think this is kind of a law that we should not support on behalf of our employees, on behalf of our values, on behalf of our customers, then they just bought into okay, well, then you're against us. So there was this montage. There was a Fox. Sorry, one last thing. There was this Fox montage that I saw where a whole bunch of the news opinion leaders there were just all about spewing negativity towards Disney. And to me, this is really it's kind of tragic. But if one of the things I saw that Krugman pointed out, 66%. Sorry, here it is. About half of Republicans believe that Democrats are involved in sex trafficking rings and the Democratic leadership, and 66% of Republicans, depending on the poll, I suppose, believe that that there's a white replacement theory. That the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate with voters from poor countries around the world. So there's this culture war thing has got traction, and it's got the potential for electoral success. One last thing, so much so that the CPAC, the next CPAC convention, is going to be in Hungary, where Viktor Orban was successfully reelected on a similar culture war strategy.
Yeah, the Daily Show is doing a series on that and going to Hungary and the similarities between the Trump movement and Orban's movement. But that all being said, I think attacking Disney is a mistake. It's not like attacking Hollywood liberals or academics. Those are things that can work because they're not all that popular as such. But Disney, this is where people bring their kids, every year. They save up their money to do this. I think that's a bad fight on their term. Orlando is not it has been through these kind of politics before. When they put up the rainbow flags for Gay Pride Day about 20 years ago or so. Pat Robertson was saying this is going to bring punishment onto the city of Orlando. There could be floods, hurricanes, maybe even a meteor. This it was really melodramatic then, and so this area seems to be one where this battle seems to be fought, and maybe they don't care. Maybe Orlando is liberal, and so they don't care if they suffer. It's not going to affect any of the red areas of the state. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, I have family there in that area, so at least I have somewhat of a finger on the pulse of over time. As a reminder, the Pulse nightclub where that shooting occurred, what it was in that community, and folks that I know there have really made it a tradition to support LGBT community on the regular basis now, because it was solidarity against hate. So the culture war is one thing when you say I sort of disagree with people I'm not comfortable with, but it's another thing to go as far as DeSantis is going. I think he really believes that this puts him in line to be number 2 behind Trump, and if anything happens with Trump, if legal jeopardy or health or time, that he's right up there in the mix as one of the top national figures, and he's really just playing to the base with the raw, dog whistle, red meat approach without much rational consideration for how dumb it is to attack the business community, the bread and butter of your tourism industry in Central Florida.
Might help him win the nomination, but it'll be difficult for him in the general election nationally. But we are out of time for that particular topic. Okay, going back to the issue of immigration, Title 42 is before the Supreme Court right now. Title 42 was passed during Trump's regime as part of a pandemic safety. It allowed It allowed for the government. Actually, it mandates that the government will block people from entering, even if they are asylum applicants, and or will reintroduce them to either their home country or Mexico. And this is very problematic. It's been questions about whether or not it's even legal to do that. If you are a applicant for asylum, you should have a full right to be able to be present and have it heard rather than in absentia, which has been happening a lot lately. It's actually very close to home. I know some Salvadoran refugees who live locally, who's they're and the young woman of that group, the daughter of the person I came to know, was stuck in Mexico for that very reason. She had applied for asylum, and it looks like she's going to get asylum. Finally, was able to come in after Biden was elected. So I don't know what the exception to Title 42 was, but the point is that this is affecting real people, and the people who are being sent back to their countries in Mexico. A human rights organization, I believe it's Human Rights Watch, has they claim that about 10,000 of them have been assaulted, raped, and otherwise attacked or suffered greatly, having been returned. That's why they applied for asylum. Some of these asylum seekers are actually Mexican citizens, so to send them back is, especially if they're wanted by gangs and everything, this is really bad. But Biden is trying to end it early due to some tricky aspects of the law, has not been able to end it so far, and I guess is pushing to end it and continuing to do so. A lot of Democrats think this is really bad politics. We're going to let people in with COVID. It's amazing how certain people, when they worry about COVID, I mean, they don't worry about it for any of the other policies, for masking, for, they don't want to get themselves vaccinated. But man, if it's another excuse to attack immigrants, they're right on it. Anyway, politics are messy. We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court as to whether or not Title 42 can stand, at least for the time being. But Biden has plans to basically sink it in May. And this has led to a lot of strange politics within the Democratic Party as well. We can talk about that, but I want to let you in on the conversation, Dave.
Yeah, this one was surprisingly complicated topic when I started looking into it, because originally it's on its surface it feels like it should be an immigration policy, but in fact it was, because it was initiated during the Trump administration as a CDC, Centers for Disease Control policy. So technically, as long as we were in an emergency but related to COVID pandemic, this policy should stand. So President Biden came in, should air quotes. President Biden came in thinking, he would respond to a promise, support or reinforce a promise he made to end these deportations to the immigrant community and people who are supporting treating people with dignity and humanity, and asylum seekers getting the true protection, full protection of the law. In other words, they would get a hearing first. But he wasn't able to do that because the president wasn't able to rescind this because of the emergency order. So then there was one element of this law that was challenged because it, like you said, evidence was clear that when you send children, unaccompanied minors, you just deport them back to either Mexico or to some other place if you could figure out where they came from. You would expose them to extreme risk related to the reasons that they left in the first place, whether it was gang violence or abuse of some other kind. And so then the question was, well, we can't keep sending the kids back. That doesn't even make sense. So for a while during Trump's administration, they were treating the children and the parents independently, but then they decided they should keep families together. So big picture, Pew Research studied the amount of people we're talking about, just to kind of wrap our heads around it. It was 2.9 million encounters along the border between when the Title 42 went into effect April of 2020 and last month. So that's like, let's call it 3 million. So of those 3 million, nearly 2 million of the people were just expelled right away under Title 42. It said, you're here, you don't belong here. For you to wait to even get a hearing to determine if you are allowed to stay, you're going to have to do it over there. So that's why this is a cause célèbre for the right, because this policy, at least from their perspective, it keeps 2 out of 3 people out of the country. But now the question is, will the Supreme Court agree that once the pandemic emergency is rescinded, what's the word, come back, lessened, or been removed. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the right word here, but can the administration then go ahead and take this policy away? And it seems like that should be almost a no-brainer, that as long as we don't still consider ourselves in a pandemic emergency, then the administration ought to have the authority about that CDC guidance being retracted. So we'll see where the Supreme Court goes. Is the Supreme Court going to somehow side with the state of Texas, which says that its rights are being violated because and Missouri, I believe, Texas and Missouri are saying that their rights as states to be protected from the COVID immigrants is going to be, needs to be protected. So I don't see the Supreme Court going that track on this, but we'll see.
The ironic thing is when this thing was initially passed, we actually had a much higher rate of COVID than Mexico did. I believe that's changed, but at the time it was kind of silly. They weren't coming here with COVID, but at any rate, that's that's neither here nor there. Where we got hit with COVID was actually from Europe, coming into the New York area, the tri-state area. So that wasn't even coming from the West Coast. But here we have it. The politics, unfortunately, these politics are not good for Democrats. There are a lot of very nativist or xenophobic even sentiments out there, even within the constituencies of the Democrats. It's just that so they've got this going in an election that's already tough enough. But Biden is still pushing it. He's pushing and saying that this is, first of all, there's probably a precedent about executive power. So that's just as that's the case with the mask mandate on travel. areas. It's again, I don't even think they're pushing to be able to even do the mask. They may even lift it as soon as they get it, but they're worried about the precedent of judicial intervention in the against the executive, which used to be something that conservatives would call overreach, judicial activism. That you're supposed to respect the separation of powers, but I think that's going to go on the wane as especially if the Republicans and the conservative movement finds it more and more difficult to win the presidency and Congress, even with all of their structural advantages. The Supreme Court's going to be their savior, so all of a sudden we're going to have a different philosophy of that. I'll let you finish it out.
Yeah, one other practical matter that I forgot to mention is that this is actually called the Migrant Protection Protocol. So the idea is that you're protecting the health and welfare of the people coming across the border by not exposing them to detention, because under immigration naturalization rules, the federal government is supposed to, I think the word is shall, meaning must, detain people unless on a case-by-case basis they trust that they're going to be able to make it back to their hearing. But so by one of the issues that I saw, I think it was raised by a human rights group, was that, well, when you deport everybody across the border and then you have to have them come back for a hearing, number one, they have a really hard time getting counsel in a detention camp or in a difficult to reach community on the border crossing land, but also they have to come across. So they have to keep trying to come across, and so many of these people might be getting double counted or triple counted or more because they're trying to figure out how to get support and guidance in their asylum process. And then finally, the estimate is that 18,000 people a day are going to be detained if this gets lifted. And so then there's just this practical matter of is the infrastructure in place we're at the highest levels of immigration in close to 20 years. And do we have the infrastructure in place to manage this problem effectively without Title 42?
Okay, well, we'll be hearing about that as if the Supreme Court decides on it anytime soon. Might decide it in June, might decide in the fall. I'm not sure exactly when to have that decision ready, but we will talk about it. Takes us to the next topic.
The Court of Appeals here in Washington has ruled quickly in our favor. We are getting a clearer picture of what happened, who was involved and who paid for it, and where the money went.
Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required.
We do not take this vote lightly, but this committee and this Congress is left with no other alternative when, in the midst of an investigation of this magnitude, we are stonewalled at every turn by those who played a central role in the planning and execution of the January 6th attack.
The committee favorably report to the House the committee's report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Mark Randall Meadows in contempt of Congress.
All right, our next topic is about a contempt citation in New York done by New York Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron. I should let people know that the Supreme Court in New York is actually the Superior Court, kind of reverse there. They refer to it as that, this pertains to Letitia James, the prosecutor for the state action, a civil action against Trump's organization, issued a subpoena for a bunch of documents from Donald Trump. Trump, of course, is not complying. He never complies, and he's used to getting away with it. Well, this time, Judge Arthur Engoron has held him in contempt, and he is in fact being fined $10,000 a day every time he doesn't comply. Now, in this fight, RNC has dedicated between $1 and $2 million, I think $1.6 million, to allow him to pay his attorney fees. They'll probably let him use some of that to pay this for a while, but $10,000 a day even if you're a billionaire like Trump, whose his wealth is questioned right now, that can take a bite. That can be a serious thing, and they'll just keep doing it until he coughs up those documents. But given the macho aspect of his politics, he probably can't do that. And so will the RNC continue to finance this? Are they willing to pay $10,000? I mean, think about all those Republican donors out there who donate, $20, $50 to the Republican Party so that they can fight for conservatism. And here they are paying off a fine because Trump, that expands every day because Trump isn't complying with the subpoena. We all, comply with subpoenas. If I didn't comply with the subpoena, I'd be held in contempt of court. I'd probably get disbarred, I mean, you have to honor them. You can go and oppose them. You try to get a protective order, but if you don't get it, then you got to honor the subpoena. That's just the law. But that doesn't matter. The Trump line is that this is a witch hunt. They're trying to use the fact that. We talked about the New York City investigation, the prosecutor. We've talked about that in the past. 2 prosecutors quit. The question is whether or not that investigation is dead. The guy actually who's the head of it insists, no, it's still going. We just had a disagreement there. But this has nothing to do with that. This is a civil action at the state level. And this woman, Letitia James, is aggressive, and she's showing it. And she has won. This is a very unusual contempt charge. Rich people are usually not held to account this way. It is very unusual.
So yeah, it seems like today we're just chock full of pretty complicated topics, but this is an interesting one because, like you said, the Manhattan court, where there was potential criminal charges, there's a grand jury that's going to expire near the end of the month. And Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, just to remind everybody, if this doesn't play out in that court, where it doesn't seem it's going to, that he's very upset about that because he's given a whole lot of testimony and supporting documents. He feels that he's made the case that this is an open and shut criminal case. Well, for inside baseball reasons, that criminal proceeding is not moving forward. This civil proceeding from the Attorney General's office, Letitia James. So the Attorney General had filed saying, we want to collect those documents. We want to see your side of this. So that request for discovery, basically paralleling some of the things that Michael Cohen's already turned over in the criminal case. The response from the Trump organization was, we found 10 documents. That's it, with nothing else. And then they asked again, no, you need to go do your due diligence and you need to find these documents. And this is really why it's contempt of court, because the judge has said that you provided, this is paraphrasing from the lawyer, that the judge's lawyer, Helena Haba, provided boilerplate response to a sworn affidavit, did not address what they searched or how they searched, and that Trump is willfully disobeying the court's order to comply with the subpoena for these documents, and that this is harming the civil investigation. So the state of New York is saying that Trump and his team, his attorneys, they are harming the state's ability to get to the bottom of this fraud, and that the claim that they somehow just didn't find it is woefully inadequate, and that they should know better, and so they're going to be punished for not providing, to paraphrase, the who, what, where, when, and how they did their search. And so that's kind of what's interesting about this. Yeah. It's about a really small piece of what's happening. And so Trump already announced he's going to appeal, which means he's not going to owe the money during the time period that the appeal is being considered.
That's right, and he can drag his feet on that, but this is what they were asking for specifically: the files located in cabinets outside Mr. Trump's office, the storage room by Mr. Trump's office, the executive office storage closet, and the file cabinets located on 25th and 26th floors. So they're very specific about what they want. They want the documents in those areas, more specific than I've ever seen it. Right? I mean, in terms terms of the location and in terms of what they know is there. And Trump is going to appeal it, but I think that the appeal will be expedited. He'll try to drag his feet on it, but it will be expedited. And but if this judge is serious, and the actual quote from the judge is, "I know you take your business seriously, Mr. Trump. I take my business seriously as well." This is going to happen unless the Supreme Court of the United States somehow rescues him. This is going to happen. And so is he just going to be paying $10,000 a day, or the Republicans and the Republican donors going to be paying that into perpetuity? Because I expect that the appeal will probably be heard within the next month. They're not going to drag their feet on this one.
Yeah, I guess that circles back to what you'd started this with, which I thought was really interesting, that the Republican, worth talking about independently, parallel to this. The Republican National Committee, RNC, has decided that it's in their best interest to take, $1.6 million of their money and make sure that Trump's well represented in the courts. And so that's when I clicked through, I forget which article or where I was, but I clicked through to see the dollar amount involved. I'm like, wow, 1.6 million. Where does this come from? What's the source? It was actually an RNC document that was like over 1,000 pages long. So somebody got a hold of their records and said, oh, like they've got line items involved. So why would they do this? Well, they're doing this because, like we talked about for the prior topic, that this is the base. Trump supporters are the active base. They're the folks who get out the vote. They're the folks that show up at all the events, et cetera, et cetera. And so the party is determined, the party leadership is determined that they need to support Trump, keep him free, keep him from criminal charges, kick the can as long as they can on the civil charges, so that he is in the arena and that he is drumming up as much voter turnout as possible, and
possibly also not wanting to have a scandal break, because if that paperwork does lead to something, then the timing of this would be the election. They really want to win that thing. So if they can kick this to beyond the election, it's worth hiring attorneys who can manage to do that. And that's what they're trying to do, is play out the clock for November. Okay, predictions. What do we got, Dave?
So I'm going to talk real briefly about what our first topic this evening was about McCarthy and those tapes that were released. Turns out that the steering committee of the Republican Party in the House, who decides what's going to their priorities and actions they're going to take on the floor of the House, they met to talk about managing the aftermath of January 6th. And I want to say it was in Politico. They were reporting on how Representative Steve Womack, retired National Guard colonel from Arkansas, Republican Congress member, was horrified by Mr. Brooks, by Congressman Brooks's comments about the black guard Capitol police officer who shot a white woman who came through the window. We all saw it. It was a tragedy, but there was an agitation attempt that Representative Womack thought was offensive. When his name is Steve Womack. So when he made his case, when he read that to the leaders of the party, he said everybody's jaw dropped, and they said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening." Well, nothing happened. McCarthy didn't do anything about it. Brooks did not get reprimanded in any way, and so Womack quit in protest, and still nothing has happened. Womack is on the record as saying, "I cannot tell you how angry I was. I resigned, and nobody cares." This is McCarthy exhibit. This is his quote, his words. Handling of the episodes are quote demonstrated a lack of leadership. So this is another element of the schism. So we have this Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney side of the party, but there are also more traditional conservative Republicans who are saying, "Look, McCarthy is not exhibiting leadership." So my prediction here is that this January 6th, as it plays out, this little tear that we heard over the weekend with these tapes being released, it's going to turn into a shred as people realize how ridiculous a dozen or so members of the Republican House are just need need to be jettisoned in order to save face for the future of the Republican Party's credibility in the House.
All right, I'll be real quick on that. There is a special election happening in Alaska. The Republican Don Young, I think, was the longest serving congressman, died at 88. He was first elected in 1973. They are holding a special election to replace him. The special election happens in June, in which they've got a whole bunch of candidates. And what happens is the top four then go to a runoff election in August, and it's actually ranked choice voting. So a lot of interesting things can happen. And then whoever wins that has got to face yet another election a few months later in November for the 2-year one. So it's really kind of a wild situation. Well, Sarah Palin, the joke is that she heard about the cocaine orgies, but anyways, is running for Congress. And I am predicting she will be one of the four, but I'm also predicting that Santa Claus is going to be elected one of the four. And no, I'm not talking about as a joke write-in. He is from North Pole, Alaska. He's on the city council there. He looks like Santa Claus, big beard and everything. He is not a member of a party. He is a Bernie Sanders supporter, supports the Bernie Sanders agenda, and he is running, and I believe that he will make it into the top four. How well he does in August, we'll have to talk about later.
Go Santa.
That brings us to the end of the show. Until next week, stay informed and stay engaged.